Welcome everyone to Cool Product Expo and our opening speaker session with Jason Mayden. Please feel free to take a seat if you haven't already, or you're also welcome to stand. So it is great pleasure that Jason will be joining us today to talk about Cool Product Expo's theme on product design for tomorrow. Jason is one of our fellow Stanford alumni, having graduated from GSB's MSX program, and he has been so kind to be the advisor for our Cool Product Expo this year. Jason has a lot of experiences in design and product, having been doing design at Nike, on the Jordan brand, as well as the Field band. And he is currently at the D.school teaching us the d.fellow, and working at Mark I as the VP of Design. So a few themes before we get started. Jason and I will be having a 30-minute conversation, and then we will open up to the floor for 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. Please stay for the entire 30 minutes out of respect for the guest and Jason. And also please make sure your phone is silent if you haven't done so already. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jason Mayden.
Thank you.
Jason, thank you so much again for coming. As I mentioned, what our theme was today. Could you share your thoughts on what this product design for tomorrow means to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was having a conversation with this gentleman right here, Diego, in the background about this very topic. Product design for the future simply means product design for the future potential of humanity. So you have to look forward towards what people will expect, what people will want. How do you take something that is unimaginable and make it possible? So the future of product design is the future of our possibilities and our own perception of limitations. So I personally don't put limits on myself. I think everything is possible. I mean, it's proof in the background that there is almost like a hoverboard in the room and there's a skateboard with one wheel. That's amazing. That's stuff that I never thought could exist as a child. But I think the future is limited by our own concept and understanding of what impossible means.
Thank you for sharing that. When you talk about the impossible, could you talk about how you get your inspiration and break away from what you think is impossible?
I get a lot of inspiration from, reading. I read a lot of historical books, a lot of historical texts. The thing about great design is it all is inspired by something. So you have to understand the origins. So that's one thing. I'm a student of history. I find a lot of inspiration in just, biomechanics, how people move, how people interact with the world that they live in. So I typically like to, if I was working with athletes, I would work out with the athlete and try to understand their pain, because athletes push through pain. It's a mental game more than it is physical. So trying to understand the psychological barriers that they have to break each day to perform. And the third piece, I just get to hang out with my two kids because they don't see the world the way I see it. I'm older, so I look at things, through the lens of how much time it would take to do it, and they look at things through how much enjoyment it will bring them. So I try to stay childlike and ask a lot of questions. Use the word "why" as one of my greatest weapons. Like, why can't that, be that way, or why can't this be this way? So between reading history, just putting myself in the mindset of the athlete, then also asking the question why, those three things typically give me a lot of inspiration and insight into what I can potentially work on.
Thank you for sharing again, and it's really cool hearing about your design from working with athletes and your kids. What do you think is like your biggest aha or surprise moment from your experiences in design?
Oh man, I would say the first physical aha moment is how difficult it is to hit a fastball. Like, that was a painful experience. I'm not a baseball player. I played football and did martial arts and boxing, but I had the misfortune of doing batting practice with Derek Jeter, and it was a very humbling experience because he's looking at me and just hitting the long ball with ease, and I get up there overconfident, and I took one to the chest, and it wasn't a pleasant experience. So I think I think that was the first humbling experience, is understanding the timing and the coordination and the hand-eye coordination and just the calmness and centeredness it takes to perform at that level. So understanding that these athletes use pressure as a catalyst for performance, where most people use pressure as a deterrent for performance or a limitation for performance. So that was the greatest insight, like pushing through pressure and using it as a positive mechanism to perform.
That's awesome. So speaking of athletes, I have to ask this on behalf of all the audience. What was it like working with Michael Jordan?
Well, the prerequisite is that you have to shave your head. So I think I passed that test. It was amazing. So Michael Jordan is, physically he is an anomaly. He's one of the only athletes that has continued to evolve in terms of his ability to capture his prey. So in sports, the aggressor or the person on offense is typically viewed as the predator. So predators in nature evolve to capture their prey. Michael is the perfect predator. So he was able to figure out a different way to control the game, whether it was on defense, where he was able to use his big hands and move people into position to dominate, whether it was on offense, where he was able to get into the paint and learn how to just, score and get to the line, whether it was the psychological aspects of basketball, where he was able to stare at every single person in the stadium and intimidate them. He just evolved. Yeah, he would intimidate the guy selling popcorn. It was amazing. He would just stare at him, and the guy would just drop the popcorn. So for me, what I learned from Michael is that excellence is a mindset. It's not an activity. And so going into everything that you do, you have to look at it from the point of victory and then work backwards from that point of victory. So I always use deduction. I always see myself succeeding first and then backing out of that success and figuring out how did I get there. And he was one of the core inspirations for my mindset of turning weaknesses into strengths. That's what he always talked about. And so I looked at my weaknesses and I turned them into a strength, or I aligned with people who had that strength, and that helped me throughout my career as I worked with them.
It's really cool to hear about working with Michael Jordan, but that leads to the next question, which is what does Nike do now that Michael Jordan is not quite what he playing basketball anymore?
Yeah, that's a great question. So strategically, as you build any company, you have to think about designing yourself out of the position of authority or the head figure. So we had this whole mantra of going from the man to the brand. So it's very strategically we transitioned into this mindset of telling stories about Michael, because now he is a myth if you think about it. He sounds like Greek mythology. He's like Perseus, this guy with winged shoes that can fly and do all these different things. So when you look at him as an icon, we're able to extract certain points of his abilities and say this athlete aligns against his ability to have perseverance, and that person is Chris Paul. Or this athlete, has his work ethic, and that person is Blake Griffin. So we've distilled Michael down into core attributes, and those core attributes allow us to go out and sign athletes that resemble him in those ways. And then beyond that, Michael is still the measurement of success. Everybody says I'm the Michael Jordan of dentistry, I'm the Michael Jordan of business, so he's become like the bar that people want to reach in order to be perceived as excellent in their craft. So we have the advantage of going out and finding the Michael Jordans of different industries and then celebrating those people with our product, services, and experiences.
That's really cool, finding Michael Jordan in each industry. But I recall talking to you before, and you talked about predicting this next Michael Jordan using data. Could you tell the audience about how that works? Because to me, it was a huge surprise that data can be used for design.
Yeah, one of my last projects before leaving Jordan Brand was a predictive analytics project. So the whole world was looking for the next Michael Jordan, and it made no sense that we weren't looking for the next Michael Jordan. So we began to weave together a narrative of this whole notion of the predator. Like, who could beat Michael? And it was just simply a version of Michael that could beat Michael, right? Because, like I said, his mindset was similar to a martial artist, where it's not me versus my opponent, it's me versus me. And so we had to figure out what would that version of Michael look like, in the future. So first we worked with a company in Palo Alto, Stanford company called Yazdi. They do topological data analysis. And we did a huge deep study of basketball with the Stanford PhD student named Muthu Alagappan. And what we found is there were 13 different styles of play versus 5 positions in basketball. Then we looked at every single game of basketball that Michael ever played. And we sat down, and it was a grueling experience, but we just did an Excel spreadsheet where we tagged every single thing Michael did, from facial expressions to victory dances to free throws to everything. We wanted to quantify Michael's excellence on the court and qualify his mindset. So then we did an interview with him. We started to try to tease out what he was afraid of, how did he perform, how did he get prepared for games, look at his splits, night game versus day games, road games versus versus home games. And what we found out is that Michael mastered all 13 of those styles of play. He's the only athlete, so he's statistically an anomaly. So we had to figure out, okay, why is that so? And then from there, we started to input census data. We started to input data around what degrees would be desirable, 15 years out, because we were looking towards near future. So going into, 2023 and beyond. And what we started to find out is that there's a very strong chance that we can craft this athlete based on this data tell a story that hasn't been told, and then the whole time we can start to put things out there that speak directly to this kid that will grow up to become the Jumpman someday. So it's almost like a comic book where we put the artifacts into the world, and the person who's supposed to rightfully take his spot will notice what that is, and they'll know that we're speaking to them, and then they'll rise to the occasion and become the Jumpman.
Could you tell me more about this Jumpman? I'm getting really curious here.
Ah, the Jumpman. So what I can share within reason is that based on the data, he'll most likely go to Cal Berkeley, unfortunately. He'll be a two-sport athlete. His primary sport would be soccer. He'll get into soccer through, get into basketball by living in Miami, because his parents, he's Afro-American and he's Latino, so he's Afro-Latino, part Cuban, part black. So he was introduced to movement through salsa, through dance, through music, so his sense of timing and rhythm is different. So he looks at the body in motion in a very different way than most basketball players. He understands footwork. He understands how to manipulate distance between his opponent. And he also has heart. He has a lot of heart, because one of the core things that Michael had was a series of near misses. So that's what made him so risk adverse. You know, when Michael was young, you know, he got cut from the team. He raced motorcycles, so he had, risk aversion. He had no sense of fear. He played baseball, so his eye-hand coordination was different. He was smaller than everyone, so he had to, have determination. He had to have stick-to-itiveness. So this kid will have all those same qualities, but in a modern form. And he'll be the first person that will play for Team USA and potentially win a gold medal in soccer and in basketball. That's his dream. And he went to Cal Berkeley because they're ranked in soccer and basketball. And he also majored in earth sciences. And all this came from data. All this came from what the data told us about this person. And then we just created an image of what he looked like. And funny enough, while we're doing this work, Michael had announced he was having twin boys with a Latino woman who was Cuban, and I'm like, this is science and life imitate. This is crazy. This is happening. So I don't know if you can place a bet on Michael's gene pool, but I would definitely invest in his children if they were a business.
That is so cool to hear about how data can be incorporated into design. Speaking of that, you talked about this boy doing salsa, and that's how he does basketball differently. What do you think, from your background, helps you do your job differently from someone from a more traditional background?
I didn't grow up, wanting to be an industrial designer. I just really wanted to design shoes to get them for free. It didn't work out that way, but I ended up designing products. So the way I approached the world was through the lens of an athlete, rather than through the lens of a creative. So in athletics, one of the things you have to understand quickly is what are your limitations and what is your role on the field. And so I knew what my limitations were. I wasn't a very great visual artist, and I wasn't a very great storyteller at that time, because I had been a person that knew what looked good, but I didn't know why it looked good. So I was an artist more than I was a designer. So the way I approach problem solving for athletes is by experimentation and immersive experiences. I put myself in their shoes because that's what's comfortable for me, and I've turned design into a sport. So when I gave up my original path of playing sports and potentially going into engineering, I turned that into my sport. So I sketched every day. I put up 1,000 sketches. Michael put up 1,000 jump shots a day, so I did 1,000 sketches. I figured if this man practices free throws that much, I should practice sketching that much. I read every book possible about design history and the origins of spatial relationships and composition, so I studied it like I would study a playbook, and design became a sport. And in sports, your competition, like I said, is yourself. So I only look at myself and my limitations in terms of, who am I competing with? I'm competing with Jason yesterday. I'm not competing with anyone in the Silicon Valley, so I look at myself as the thing that I need to push myself. And what that has allowed me to do is to meet some really great people. It's allowed me to remain humble and focused in every circumstance, because I can learn from everyone. And it's also put me in a position where I'm able to see different opportunities in the market space, because I always go and attack my weaknesses before anyone else does. So that's the reason I went to business school. Designers have to understand the language of business. There's a false phenomenon in art school where you hang out with other creatives, and then you get into the real world and you're the only creative in the room. So you have to understand the language. You have to take away the way that they can tell designers no. And that's by understanding numbers and business and strategy. So by putting myself in those conversations, it allows me to be faster than the future and see opportunities that other people ignore, and then be able to capitalize on that by simply being able to weave together a narrative that makes sense for the business and for the consumer.
Speaking of opportunities, where do you think the next opportunity for products will be?
Oh man, two very specific spaces that people are ignoring are end-of-life care and our food system, our food supply. I think design will be able to disrupt the way in which food is created, food is distributed, food is consumed, not only in America but globally. And I also think, people are ignoring an aging population that have a lot of relevant problems, because at some point, if you're fortunate, you're going to grow older. But who's designing for those people? Who's making a world that's easy for them to navigate, easy for them to be, part of society and feel valued and appreciated? And so I think we've lost that sense of respecting our elders, and I think design can bring that back and design a beautiful world that allows people to age gracefully and respectfully and still contribute to the well-being of humanity.
It's really cool. And your current startup, Mark 1, actually attacks this food part.
Yes.
Could you talk about how working there has been different from working at Nike?
Yeah, budget. I mean, the most obvious one. I would say beyond any capital constraints, I think that it isn't necessarily different. It's just at the other end of the spectrum. So when you look at what Nike does, we design for the body in motion, right? So we design for activity tracking, we design for biomechanics, kinesiology, physiology, all the things that help people perform. But when you go back to phase 0, performance is based on intake, meaning what you consume. So I always tell people premium fuel equals premium performance. People, I was telling Diego, treat their cars better than they treat their body. They drive a vehicle and they're like, oh, I need to put premium fuel in my car, otherwise it won't perform. But then you go to McDonald's and you eat that, and then you wonder why you feel sluggish. And so we're trying to teach people not to replace their ability to make decisions, but to augment their intelligence, give them just a little bit more data to make smarter decisions so that they can stay at what we call prime, which is an optimal state of well-being, physically strong and cognitively sharp. You do that through proper hydration. So our first piece is educating people on the importance of proper hydration. And then from there, there's a myriad of opportunities for them to get healthier, build muscle, get better sleep, feel more, less jittery from being over-caffeinated. But we start with the basic, which is proper hydration.
It's really cool, and we've talked a lot about products. At this point, I would like to transition more into your leadership and career experiences. I know a lot of us are thinking about going to startups or working at a startup or starting our own startup. Like, how has that experience been for you?
Yeah, it's been, the thing about startups is that I think the name startup, the word startup, is misleading because so many people are afraid to start in general. So, there's an atrophy of intent. It's like, oh, I'm scared. I don't know if the world will like what I'm doing. I don't know if people will actually purchase my product, experience my service. And so I would like to call it new venture formation. I think people, form new ventures and try new opportunities. For me, I think the learnings have been around designing culture. That's the most important piece, because culture is what's going to live on beyond your tenure as a leader. And as a leader, you rent your role. No one owns their job. I tell my team all the time, someday I will not be here. I have to prepare you to take my role. So succession planning in your culture is extremely important, because if there is a sense of arrogance around you owning that position, then you automatically impede your organization's ability to see themselves in the future. So then you build into your culture a sense of people who will eventually have a high attrition rate. People will leave if they don't see themselves in the future. So that's the first piece I've learned about startups, is giving people a clear vision of where they can potentially go through proper career planning, proper succession planning, and being able to have a product roadmap that matches a culture roadmap. As you go from an early stage company to a large scale company. So culture is important. The second piece is being flexible and being nimble, and not letting yourself take anything personal. There's a lot of people who feel nervous at getting critical feedback. Critical feedback is so important. Like I tell the team all the time, give a quick no and a very slow yes. Deliberate on your decisions. Really make sure that you use the proper data to make the decision. I tell my team all the time, you make the decision. It's my job to challenge how you made that decision. I'm not a big micromanager and holding of the hand. I'm a person that likes to empower the team so that they feel like they're included in the decision-making process. And then the second piece is really around, or the third piece I should say, is really around being flexible with your idea budget. So I tell my team, when you join a company, you get equity, right? Which means you share in the upside of a business. That same thing has to take place with an idea. If you try to go in and fight for 100% of your idea, people can't see themselves being part of your success. So I say, fight for 75% of your idea, leave 20% of your idea as equity for your counterparts, your colleagues to participate in. Have strategic concessions built into the concept that you present, because it makes the conversation easier and it allows people to see themselves in your success, which then builds, once again, back to that.
Speaking of culture, how do you think this culture that you're building helps collaboration between designers, engineers, and say sales, for example. Each company has multiple disciplines.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, I learned at Nike. We had a structure called the Triad, where designers work with engineers and marketers. So we all contributed to the process of making the product, but we were all responsible for our independent function. So we used a lot of RACI models, which responsible, accountable, supports, consults, inform, to make sure people knew where they should be in what part of the process. And so we carried that into our culture, where we work with hybrid teams. So there are folks sitting right next to software front end, working on the app. There are people sitting with the EEs and MEs. So instead of an assembly line, it is more of a gumbo where everyone's ideas are considered and vetted, and then it goes to to each phase gate in our process and says, is this where we should be against our design principles, our design ethos? So we have our filters in place to say no. Everyone is about to contribute in terms of building the idea. But at the end of the day, it's on design to make sure that it's functional, it's purposeful, and it's beautiful and meaningful to the consumer.
Having balanced all these different aspects of the product is very difficult. And I have to say, being an engineering background myself, I sometimes wonder if design, maybe like the certain designs are useful. How do you make sure that you balance beauty and functionality?
Well, I mean, functionality is beautiful, The products that people regard as breakthrough typically start with solving a very obvious problem in a non-obvious way. So we use objects like the cup, for example. It's a ubiquitous object that has never been updated in terms of its functionality. It holds a liquid, and that's what it does. So we took that object and we added a very non-obvious feature to it. We did automated nutrient tracking for the Halo vessel, where we look at the components of the beverages you drink, the proteins, the fats, the sugars. And the same thing for the hydration piece. We know, what percentage of each liquid is water and how that goes against that prime metric that we created. So for us, we obsess over function. It has to work. It has to work, because if it works, then people don't have to worry about it. And you take away that worry, and that's when people really start to enjoy the benefits of your product, the look, the feel, the color. So once you nail that function, then that's the thing that people don't have to worry about. So we obsess over that all the time. And then we have a great marketing function that goes out and does a lot of quantitative and qualitative research to make sure that we are accurately aligned against the opportunity. People don't know necessarily what they want, but they know what they hate. And so we focus on making sure we don't deliver something that people hate. And it's real easy to deliver something that people will not like when you have that sense of arrogance, assuming that your solution is the best one. So we treat ourselves like our competitors sometimes. We examine and say, what are our weaknesses? How will someone attack us? How will someone come after our business model? How will someone attack our product? And we take that same critical filter to everything. So we think about how we would take ourselves out before anyone else does. So that allows us to stay, like I said, humble and hungry and nimble in our process to make sure we're solving the right problems.
Thank you for sharing. Well, personally, I'm really impressed at how you're able to be so technically deep while having such a high-level position. Could you speak about how was your transition from designer to managing people, and how you managed to still be so into the design?
That's a great question. I think a lot of organizations don't prepare individual contributors to be leaders. I had the great fortune of growing up with a father that was a special forces captain, so leadership was embedded into our upbringing. My first book that I remember reading was like The Art of War. It was weird. It was like, why am I like 10 years old reading this book? But I understand now, looking back, that my dad was getting me to be a critical thinker, to ask better questions, to find better problems to solve. And in leadership, you're not the person that, I don't think of leadership as George Washington on the Potomac pointing saying we're going here. I think of leadership as the person in the back of that boat rowing the hardest, making sure that we're keeping momentum. So my job is to be the pace keeper, but from behind, So making that transition, I found leadership role models. And once again, back to history, my leadership role model is Marcus Aurelius. He wrote a book called The Emperor's Handbook. And he was the fifth of the 5 great emperors of Rome. And it was amazing that he was able to focus on being a positive leader despite the fact that his own army was trying to kill him. People were coming after him, and he was still focused about, servant leadership and being positive and being an example and not, overreacting, but, strategically responding. And so I look for leadership heroes in antiquity and try to learn from them. So books like The Art of War, books like The Emperor's Handbook, books like Good to Great, from some of the professors at Stanford. I just try to soak up as much knowledge as possible so I don't repeat other people's mistakes. And also, you know, I try to focus on being an asterisk in terms of my visibility. You know, I try to manage up, manage down, manage across, and manage the angles. Because it's important to, like you said, not necessarily do the work anymore, but be informed of what the work is, so that I can help, you know, nurture and guide the people that report to me to someday take my job. Like, I have no confusion on what my role is. My role is eventually to design myself out of my role, to prepare someone else to be my backfill. And so I try to give them strategic learning opportunities to take a portion of my role and master that. And then as you graduate from that portion, take on another portion. Then you graduate to the point where you can do my job. And at that point, I can appoint a backfill and move on.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I want to make sure we save time for the audience. So I will give you my last question, which is a GSB favorite. So I'm sure you already know what it is. What matters most to you and why?
What matters most to me is my wife and my 2 kids. I mean, that's it. They go with it. That's it. That's the most important thing, I mean, for me. Because, you know, people get caught up. You know, I always get the question of, you know, you do so much, you travel, you know, how do you, the work-life balance? And the way I answer this is I don't look at it as a balance. That means that there has to be a trade-off between being with my family and doing what I love. I just include my family in what I love. I take them with me. You know, I mention them in every lecture I give. You know, I try to make sure that I talk to my wife before I speak, so I include them in my journey. They're not passengers on my journey, they're co-pilots. And so I think they're the most important, you know, most important thing to me.
Thank you again so much for sharing. At this time, I would like to open it up to the audience. Does anyone have a question?
What would you say to children who are interested in innovation and design? Like, how should they start their journey?
Oh man, that's a great question. I would tell you, don't grow up. Seriously, like, physically you can age, but mentally stay right where you are. Because innovation, people think you need like this big, deep technical expertise in order to be an innovator. That's very false. You need to see the world for what it could be rather than what it is. And children do that. You know, my wife laughs, but you know, I talk to myself a lot. And people think I'm crazy, but that's what I used to do when I was a kid. You know, I would pretend, I would imagine myself, you know, fighting, you know, grizzly bears in the south side of Chicago, even though there were no trees and there were no forests. I would still pretend like I was wrestling animals because I had to get this thing out, this creativity out. I had to become what I thought I could be in my mind. So I would say the first step is to never grow up mentally, always stay in that play space, you know, that imagination space. 2, make sure that you tell everybody you meet your dream. You're gonna have a lot of people that tell you that your dream is ridiculous. That tell you that, you know, oh, innovator, designer, you'll never make that possible. Get it out there so you feel comfortable early with communicating who you want to be, and get comfortable early with getting critical feedback. You know, a lot of people take what people say to them personally. Don't take it personal. People will critique your idea. They're not critiquing you as a person. They're not telling you that you are crazy or telling you that you don't have potential. But get used to people telling you that your ideas are crazy, and then completely ignore it. You know, you have to become numb to it before you can ignore it, right? And then the third piece is just keep doing what you're doing now, exposing yourself to things like this, because I don't have all the answers. I may have one thing that makes sense to you, but once you start to connect the dots, listening to multiple people, you'll have a perspective that's right for you. There is no such thing as becoming the next anyone else. It's only becoming the first you. And that's what I tell a lot of people. Become the first you. Don't worry about being someone else, okay? Don't do that. Be the first you. Do what's right for you. Follow your journey, your path, and never allow someone to place their limits on you. When someone says, oh, you can't do that because of this, that's their limit. That's not your limit. That's not your possibilities, okay? So don't let other people place their limits on you. And just like I said, don't grow up.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, great talk. I'm a designer at a small startup, and we're a small design team actually. It's just 2 of us here. And so we don't really have product managers, and we end up stepping into that role a lot. Do you have any advice on kind of how effectively a design team can operate as the design team and also the product management team?
That's a great question. I personally, no disrespect to product managers, I personally think designers are better equipped to be product managers because it's our job to see opportunities, long tail opportunities, not just momentary opportunities like, oh, this is nice today. I would say really get a sense of strategy. Market strategy in particular, Michael Porter is a great resource. Understanding Porter's 4 forces is hugely important because you have to look at the market. You have to look at micro and macroeconomics and understand where's the world headed in order to truly manage a product's life cycle. When the cost of raw goods go up or inputs go up like oil and metal, that affects what type of materials designers would use to create products, services. It changes the dynamic on which countries you go to manufacturing. When you understand tariffs and customs, in other countries on where you can import and export without having to, mark up your product with a crazy price and pass on unfortunately, the cost to the consumer. So understanding that stuff, like just a little bit of the business strategy and market dynamics, that helps you step into that product manager role and look at it holistically, because they're looking at the product in its life cycle. You can look at the benefit of the solution you have for the problem you're trying to solve, and look at the long tail benefit. And like I said, strategy is, a lot of people, say culture eats strategy, so on and so forth. You still need both. You still need both. I wouldn't so much look at the title product manager and get discouraged by it. Just look at it like creative direction. That's more so what it does. Creative direction with business intent, essentially. And you guys are well equipped. And you're very fortunate to have 2 of you, because that means that it's binary. It's a yes and a no. When you start to go beyond 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, you have to design by committee. But you can make quick decisions and get to that quick no, which is hugely important. So, that would be the bit of advice I would give you, like embrace that. Embrace the fact that you don't have a product manager. Learn from it, because that's what designers will need to become. We'll need to become strategists in the future. We're going to have to be the people that think about future opportunities for businesses. And we're going to have to be the people that identify better problems to solve. Right now, we provide solutions, but problem identification is more important than solution, deliverance. So I will focus on that.
Next question.
What's been your favorite design project that you've worked on recently, during your career, or at the D.school? What is your favorite and why?
Oh man, that's a great question. It's 2 projects. One was with the Dornbecker Children's Hospital, so we did that every year, where we worked with kids who were terminally ill or coming off of very severe accidents or treatments. And we would work with them and design products that then was sold to donate money back to the Children's Hospital. And the reason that was important is because, when you're sitting there with a kid who's battling leukemia, and they're looking at you, and you're sketching a shoe, and you're talking with them, and you're literally seeing life come back to their skin. They go from gray to fully just alive. Skin is red and vibrant, and it's just because you acknowledge them, and it's just because you sat there and you were childlike and you sketched shoes with them. It was the most humbling experience in the world. I mean, I've had the great fortune and blessing of working with every single one of my heroes. I've met, I've worked with, I've become friends with them. But nothing gave me greater joy and satisfaction than sitting with a child that, really looked at life for each single precious moment, and I was able to play a part in that. Man, it was amazing. And so I would say from a shoe perspective, it was that. From a current perspective, it's definitely the work I'm doing now at the D.school, focusing on, the psychology and well-being, the holistic perspective of well-being for minority males, particularly in America. It's an area that I'm passionate about, simply because, mental health and physical health is often ignored within the minority community. And so focusing on that at the D.school, researching around ways to embed that into the way we think and how we actually show up in communities, and then also the consumption stuff we're doing at Mark 1. I resigned from Nike because of my son. We found out he had a ton of food allergies and intolerances. And I figured, okay, if I'm going through this and I have all this knowledge about how to help athletes, how many other families are going through this? How many other children are battling this? And is there something we can do about it? My favorite project is the ones I'm currently working on.
That was a great answer to the last question about product management. I'm kind of curious, when you have a junior design team, there's not a design culture really. Mm-hmm. Like you mentioned, just leaving room for other people to put in thoughts, like 70-25, 70-30. How do designers get a seat at the table at a new enterprise or an engineering culture or business culture? Kind of what are some of your strategies around that?
That is an excellent question. First, make sure that the table is round. Seriously, so you don't have any visual hierarchy. Designers have the ability to create moments, right? You can create the moment by which your voice is relevant and valuable. So design the moment. First and foremost, design the environment. I'm serious about the round table. It has to be no visual hierarchy. People have to feel like they're part of a community, not part of a corporation, for one. Two, I would say definitely, go and ask your colleagues in the engineering culture what keeps them up at night. Like, really understand what they're afraid of. Really understand, what it is that is motivating them to come into work each day. That's the benefit of a designer, right? We can ask crazy questions and people think, like, oh, it's just a designer, he's not doing anything. That was my tactic all the time. Like, why discounted cash flow is important? What is that? Why is, XYZ important? Because, a lot of people don't think that we find them valuable, because designers are the cool people, right? We're the ones who go off and do all this stuff, and when we acknowledge our colleagues and look at them, it's like, what you do is amazing. You're a mechanical engineer, you're a biomechanist, you're an EE, you're an algorithms person. Man, that is amazing. And we ask those people questions and we find interest in what they do. You'll be surprised, people love to talk about themselves. And then you use that as a way to build that trust and that alignment. And then once you get that familiarity, then people want you at the table, because now you're not just a designer, you're a colleague, you're a person that has value. So the value comes through just relating and understanding what motivates people, what keeps people up at night, what their day-to-day problems are, and then how design can potentially play a role in solving that. It comes to, we have to be ambassadors of culture. We have to make sure that we understand enough about everyone else's language so that they feel comfortable with us. That's the role of design. We are the glue in organizations, even though sometimes it may seem like we're the cool kids or we're the ones that get all the attention and the praise and the coverage. It really is on us to be the servants of the culture, to make sure that everyone feels like their voice is heard, and that design becomes a team sport and it becomes something that everyone can participate in. So you have to find a way to allow everyone to feel included in your process, and that happens by just simply building that relationship through conversation.
Do we have another question?
Hey man, great speech. I'm working with a prosthetic device company. We'd love for you to stop by if you have a moment later. But the idea is that our team is growing, our design team is growing exponentially. And what are your thoughts on maintaining the original design DNA within the team, where new guys that have been there, done that, got the cool sneakers, are coming in here, knocking on the doors and trying to change things around?
Yep.
Basically, what do you recommend making sure that stays right?
Yeah, I would say having a clear mission is important, and having design ethos are important. So people need to understand, how to say no to stuff, because it's real easy in a design process to say yes to everything that's cool. That's amazing, that's amazing. But designers have to be the best editors in the company. Our job is to edit the world, not just to create a bunch of junk. So you have to have filters to edit. So once you have those ethos, you can say, you know what, that's an awesome idea, but does it feel like X, whatever your name and your ethos are. In our company, we call our ethos Cosmos, and so everything that we do, when we sit down and we talk about our products, our services, and our experiences, we say, does it feel like that? If it doesn't, okay, maybe we shouldn't do it. But when you do that, put it in the parking lot, have an innovation plan and say, you know what, that's a great idea, just not now. You have to say no. I mean, the best ideas, sometimes have to be turned down and just put further out on the roadmap. So I would say when new people come in, let them have a voice, let them be heard, but make sure that those ideas that are valuable are tracked, are captured in an invention disclosure form or whatever it is, if for IP reasons, and put it on a roadmap at a future date to investigate. But coming in, you don't want your mission to be derailed by having people bring new ideas that may be right, but just not right now. So those ethos are important, and having that clear mission is important.
So how did you implement the new technology with Nikes, such as Flywire and some of the synthetics and Fuse too?
Yeah, it's a great question. So his question was, how do we implement or integrate the new technologies into the products we design? It's like I talked about earlier, understanding the human body in motion. So we study athletes. I mean, we obsess over athletics. We obsess over the body in motion. I was working actually on a shoe that was based on a woman that was in Special Olympics, because she had one leg amputated and she was wearing the Asur, the cheetah, the inverted carbon fiber leg, and she was a sprinter. And so understanding the dynamics by which she was able to move and how her body worked and how mentally she worked, I knew which technologies to align against how she physically competed. And so you have to study the body in order to know which technologies apply to that athlete. That gets down to the analytics piece, right? Where if you understand 13 positions on the course, 13 styles of play, you can now say, okay, LeBron is this style of player. And then also it's just experimentation. You know, you play with different things, you see what works, and then you put it out into the world. So it's just, you know, it's being fearless and just trying stuff a lot of times.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Hi, it's a great motivational talk. I just want to know how your experiences as a person of color, how that impacted you, perhaps in design school and with Nike?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Honestly, you know, it's something that I'm very passionate about, extremely passionate about it, because I'm always probably the only person that looks like me in every room that I've been in. And I understand that, you know, it's not about me. It's definitely never about me. It's about me making sure that the door is left open for the next person. And so there's a reason I dress a certain way. And I always tell people, you know, I wear my hat backwards most of the time. I wear sneakers and jerseys. And it's not because I want to be a child or anything like that. It's because I have to change the paradigm on how people view people that dress that way. People that look like me, that wear jerseys and sneakers and hats. And if they have a pleasant experience with me, and they realize like I'm highly educated and highly accomplished, then the next time they see a person, they may not judge them so quickly. They may give them a shot because they'll reference me. And so I understand every single thing I do is not about me. It's about my son. It's about your son, your daughters, because we have to start thinking about opportunities for us to show up in ways that we're comfortable. You know, and people always talk about playing the game. Yes, there is a game to be played, but you don't have to play yourself. You don't have to let go of yourself. You don't have to culturally cleanse yourself to be accepted. You should bring who you are to work. You should bring your ideals, your faith, your fears, your worries, your concerns, your cultural norms, and that should be why you're accepted. Because differences are what make products beautiful. Without, you know, that diversity of thought, not just diversity of culture or gender, but without diversity of thought, we can't create solutions that serve humanity, right? And so right now in design, there's this big, you know, push in the Silicon Valley where people say, oh, design is taking over the valley. No, it's not taking over the valley. People are just acknowledging the power of design and its potential. But the beauty of design is that it's intended to serve humanity. In order to serve humanity, you have to accept people for their differences, and you have to be, you know, aware of color. People say, oh, I'm colorblind. I think that's the worst thing you can say. You have to see color and find the beauty in it. You have to embrace it, because that is what inspires me. It's being around people of different cultures. It's being around people I can learn from. It's trying new foods, listening to new music. You know, going to countries where I don't speak the language and finding myself getting lost in art museums. That's exciting to me. And I think being a person of color, you know, a lot of people say, oh man, you know, you have these challenges with racism and discrimination. But for me, I don't use that as an excuse, because that's another person's problem. That's not my problem. I look at it as a catalyst, not a crutch. It's the thing that motivates me. It's the thing that pushes me forward. Being the person that is in opposition of the stereotype or the prejudgment. You know, and I refuse to change just to be accepted. I never will change to be accepted, because at the end of the day, I have to go home and look at my wife and kids, and they have to see that I'm living an authentic life that represents who I am. And so no matter what circle I'm in, I'm focused on my faith and my family. And if people don't accept me for that, then those aren't people I should do business with.
Sorry. Thank you for sharing that. Last question for Jason. Okay, well, I'm sorry. Hi, Jason.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. We had a Cool Product Expo planning breakfast. You talked a little bit about comic books and how that kind of has influenced your design style and your development as a designer. Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, I love comic books. It's obvious I'm a nerd. I went to Stanford, so it's okay. I'm amongst my people to talk about. Comic books are great because it doesn't, it's not, you know, it reflects reality, but it's not, you know, confined to reality. And the thing about great products is that they tell great stories. And from comic books, I learned how to tell great stories in short statements. Like, you get one little, you know, comment bubble, and it's just one sentence, and it's the most impactful sentence in the world. And it's like, man, if you can distill a product down to one pure sentence and have that type of impact that Batman has when he says, damn you Joker, and you see the little action bubble and you punch him in the stomach, it's like, that's amazing. You know, I want that same feeling with my product. So I think comic books help me learn how to distill my message down into digestible chunks that are impactful and meaningful, both from a visual sense, from a functional sense, and from a narrative perspective.
Thank you again, Jason, for joining us. A few things before we end, that is, we will be having a closing speaker session at 5:30. It will be in the conference room over there. Our speaker will be Mo Tanabiam from Samsung's Innovation Lab, and we hope you can join us. Until then, please enjoy your day at the expo, and please join me in thanking Jason for coming.
Jammie. Are you guys going to post it?